Bali is the kind of place that gets inside your head before you even arrive. You picture it in warm tones, soft light filtering through palm trees, the smell of incense drifting along stone pathways, the sound of the ocean just beyond a resort wall. People fly across entire oceans to reach it, carrying with them the quiet hope that distance alone can change something, that a new place can reset something old and broken, that somewhere beautiful is also somewhere safe. Sheila von Wiese-Mack believed that. She believed it enough to book 10 nights at one of the most exclusive resorts on the island, business class flights, ocean views, fine dining, everything that money and love and hope could arrange. She was bringing her teenage daughter Heather along, and she had decided, the way a mother sometimes has to decide against all available evidence, that this trip was going to fix something between them, that Bali would give them a chance to breathe, to reconnect, to find each other again. She was wrong, but she didn't know that yet. On the morning of August 12, 2014, a taxi driver sat outside the St. Regis Bali Resort waiting on a young couple who had left their suitcase in his trunk. They had gone back inside the hotel. Bill told him they would be quick. An hour passed, then more. Annoyed and behind on his day, he got out of the car and opened the trunk himself. What he found made him stagger backward. Blood was seeping from the seams of the suitcase, darkening in the morning heat. He drove directly to the nearest police station and left it there. Inside was a woman in her 50s or 60s. Blonde hair soaked through with blood, her arms and hands were covered in bruises. Several of her fingers were broken. The blows she had received to her head had been devastating and repeated, delivered by a heavy, blunt object. And yet the blows themselves were not what killed her. The injuries to her face had caused her airway to collapse. She had suffocated, slowly in the dark inside a suitcase. Through luggage tags and hotel records, her identity came quickly. She was Sheila von Wiese-Mack, 62 years old, from Oak Park just outside Chicago. She had been staying at the St. Regis with her teenage daughter, Heather. They had checked in on August 9th, just 3 days before the suitcase turned up. And according to the hotel, Heather had checked out without a word milliers. That's it. No mention of her missing mother, no report filed, nothing. The couple who had loaded the suitcase into the taxi were now being traced. To understand how this happened, you have to go back. Not to Bali. Much further. Sheila was a woman who moved through life with generosity and warmth. Her close friend Elliot described her as someone who loved old wine, old books, and old friends. Her home was always open. Her table was always full. She hosted, she traveled, she brought people together. She had been married to James Mack, a celebrated jazz and classical composer whose work spanned more than 60 albums. Together, they built a life that by most measures appeared charm. High society events, a wide and devoted circle of friends, and a beautiful home in Oak Park that reflected everything they had made together. And then came Heather, their only child. Sheila's sister Debbie said the arrival felt like completion. Every wall in the house was covered in photographs of the girl. She was the center of everything. James called her the apple of his eye, and Heather, by her own description, was fiercely devoted to her father. The two of them shared a love for music, theater, and ballet. Their bond was unmistakable, the kind that defines a childhood in the best possible way. Then, in 2006, everything shifted. James fell ill while the family was on a cruise. A serious infection spread to his spinal cord, and from that point forward, he needed a wheelchair. A few years later came the diagnosis of colon cancer. The family took a trip to Greece, hoping for rest. But James died in the hotel room, alone with a 10-year-old Heather, when a blood clot reached his lungs. He was gone almost immediately. Heather blamed her mother. She said the trip had been Sheila's idea, that her father had never wanted to go, that Sheila had taken him there and he had died. Whether or not that version of events has any truth to it doesn't fully matter, because what happened inside Heather after that loss became something that could not be reasoned with or redirected. Grief in a child that age, especially grief wrapped in blame, can calcify into something else entirely. And in Heather's case, it did. By middle school, she was defiant in ways that went beyond the ordinary. She stole Sheila's car. She stole money from the house. She stopped attending school. She sought out older, rougher company. She was arrested for underage drinking. She was pregnant at least twice before she was 18. And the violence inside the home became something documented in official records. 86 separate police callouts to that address. Heather would bite, hit, shove, once pushing Sheila hard enough that she fell and broke her arm. Each time, Sheila declined to press charges, said she had already lost James. She was not going to lose Heather, too. Sheila wrote to a friend once in an email that reads now like a quiet cry for help. She described Heather as disturbed and very sick. She wrote that the intake team at a psychiatric facility had wanted to admit Heather on the spot, but that Heather would not have complied. And then at the end of the message, Sheila wrote that she was really scared of what Heather might do next. That line sat in an email inbox unread by the right people for years. Heather's version of her mother tells a different story. She described Sheila as an alcoholic, a drug addict, a woman with multiple personalities. None of the people who knew Sheila well have ever corroborated any of it. But Heather said it, and she kept saying it, and the version of her mother she created became the story she would return to again and again. At 18, Heather met Tommy Schaefer at a party. He was 21 and describing himself as an aspiring rapper. They became inseparable almost immediately, the way people do when they have found something in each other that feels like permission. Sheila saw it and knew it was dangerous. Tommy openly hated her. And the feeling, by all evidence, was returned in kind. There was something else. Before James died, he had updated his will. $11 million in assets left to Heather, along with $1.5 million in a trust. The conditions attached to those assets specified that Heather would only receive them if Sheila was no longer alive. Whether James anticipated what that clause might one day mean or whether it was simply a standard arrangement is something no one can say for certain. But Heather and Tommy knew about it. And together they let that knowledge take on a shape. Messages between them were violent and obsessive. They called each other Bonnie and Clyde. 6 months before the trip to Bali, Tommy sent a message to his cousin. He wrote that Heather had asked him to find someone to kill her mom for $50,000. Days before they flew out, he was texting about drowning her, about smothering her with a pillow, and still Sheila kept providing, kept loving, kept arranging beautiful things for her daughter. The Bali trip was the latest attempt to reach her. 10 nights, 5 stars, the most stunning part of the island she could find. On August 2nd, mother and daughter boarded a business-class flight together. Photos taken on the plane show them smiling, arms around each other, happy, or something that looked like it. Once they checked into the resort on the 9th, hotel staff and guests began noticing something different. Something different. Arguments in the lobby, raised voices from their room. The tension that photographs will never show you. What Sheila did not know was that Tommy had booked his own flight to Bali on a credit card Heather had stolen from her. On the evening of August 8th, Sheila emailed her friend, Elliot. She wrote that Heather had run off hours earlier and could not be found. She had discovered that Heather had used her name and room number to fraudulently obtain prescription painkillers from the resort clinic 4 days earlier and had secured quite a supply. Sheila wrote that she was more frightened than ever. Tommy arrived the next day, having flown business class on $12,000 of Sheila's stolen money. He checked himself into a room a few floors above them. And across that evening and deep into the following night, the two of them moved through the hotel, texting constantly, meeting briefly on the beach, circling back together as Tommy emptied the mini bar and whatever else he could find. By 2 in the morning, Sheila was in her room. At 3:15, the couple met back up. Then Sheila came out looking for Heather. She came down to the lobby visibly panicked, found her daughter there, and pulled her by the arm back toward the room. The texts that followed are hard to read. Heather and Tommy went back and forth about who would be the one to do it. Tommy wrote asking if she could hit her in the head with a big pole. Heather wrote back that she knew her mother's habits, her routines, how she moved at certain times of night. She called herself sneaky, smart. She wrote that it was like breaking out of jail. She signed it, Trust Bonnie. Tommy found a glass fruit bowl with a metal handle in his room. He told Heather to find one in hers. She said she couldn't do it alone. She needed him there. He put the bowl under his shirt and came downstairs. Sheila was in bed. Drifting off, Heather covered her mother's mouth. And Tommy struck her in the head 12 times. They wrapped her in a bed sheet. They folded her body into the suitcase, Heather sitting on top of it to force it closed. An hour later, they were at reception, wheeling the case across the lobby. The taxi driver waiting outside never suspected anything. The camera footage caught all of it. They checked into a nearby motel using their real names and Sheila's credit card. Within a day of the body being found, a police officer knocked on the door of room 1701 dressed as a housekeeper. Tommy answered, and they were arrested. Their explanation was that masked intruders had broken into the hotel room and killed Sheila, while the couple somehow escaped. In a resort accessed by key cards, monitored by cameras, staffed around the clock, this story lasted approximately as long as it took investigators to review the footage. There was one more piece of information that emerged during the early stages of the case. Heather was pregnant. The trial took place in Indonesia, drawing media attention from across the world. Indonesia does not use juries. A panel of judges evaluated the evidence, and they focused particularly on the deliberate nature of the actions taken after the killing: the staging, the suitcase, the taxi, the motel, the cover story. None of it spoke to a moment of rage or a loss of control. It spoke to planning. The judges rejected any argument of self-defense or sudden provocation. Tommy admitted he was the one who struck the blows, though at various points he tried to frame it as a reaction to Sheila attacking him. Heather's position was more fluid. She admitted involvement and then pulled back from it. She told one version in which she hid in the bathroom while Tommy attacked her mother out of his own greed. She said she was afraid of him and had only helped to conceal it afterward. People who had known Sheila their entire lives found this version of events difficult to accept. Sheila knew Heather was pregnant before they ever left for Bali. The idea that she suddenly turned violent when she found out, that she ran screaming for a knife, that she attacked Tommy and gave him no choice, was something those closest to her simply could not reconcile with the woman they knew. Both were found guilty. Tommy received 18 years for premeditated murder. Heather received 10 years for assisting in the murder. Heather was sent to Karabakan prison, which quickly became something she seemed to treat as an inconvenience rather than a consequence. She had access to social media. She posted videos of herself dancing, smoking, eating fast food. She spoke to journalists. She gave interviews. Each time, the story shifted slightly. In one of the most widely circulated interviews, she looked directly into a camera and said she did not regret killing her mother. She said that in her heart, in her soul, in her blood, she had wanted her mother dead. She said that when she was 10 years old, her mother had killed her father in a hotel in Athens. The death certificate for James Mack lists the cause of death as pulmonary embolism, a blood clot in the lungs. Tommy, by contrast, showed remorse. He admitted fully to what he had done. He said if he could take it all back, he would. He turned down his own parole, stating that he needed to serve every year he had been given. He has consistently maintained that Heather was the architect of everything that happened, that without her, he would not have been in that room. Whether that framing makes him more sympathetic or simply more strategic is something reasonable people disagree about. He flew to Bali on stolen money with messages on his phone about drowning and smothering, and he was the one holding the bowl. Heather gave birth to a daughter inside the prison. They named her Stella. For the first 2 years of Stella's life, she lived with Heather behind bars, appearing in the videos Heather posted online. Tommy's mother petitioned a court in Chicago to be named as Stella's legal guardian. The judge denied the request because Heather and Tommy could not reach an agreement. Stella eventually entered the foster care system in Bali. She was raised by a foster family on the island where her grandmother was murdered. In 2016, Tommy's cousin, who had been the recipient of those early messages about finding someone to kill Sheila for $50,000, pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges. He had agreed to help plan the killing in exchange for $66,000 from Heather's inheritance. He received 9 years. In October 2021, after serving 7 years of her 10-year sentence, Heather was released early for good behavior. She announced that she wanted to stay in Bali and start a new life there. She was deported to the United States almost immediately, arriving back in Chicago, apparently believing she would be free to travel to California and begin again with Stella. She had already been indicted by a federal grand jury on conspiracy to commit murder of a United States national on foreign soil. FBI agents were waiting at O'Hare. She was arrested on the tarmac, Stella at her side, the foster mother from Indonesia accompanying them both. The case moved through the federal system over the following years. In 2023, facing the possibility of nearly 30 years in prison, Heather stood before a judge and pleaded guilty. She said she understood what she had to accept. She said she knew she would spend most of her adult life behind bars and that she had made peace with it. In January 2024, she was sentenced to 26 years. In the courtroom that day, Heather cried. She apologized to the members of Sheila's family who were present. She said she could not take back what she had done. She said she was not the same person she had been at 18. She said that becoming a mother herself had helped her finally understand what her own mother had felt. Sheila's brother said it was the first time he had ever heard Heather apologize. So he said he appreciated it. Whether an apology delivered in front of a judge under the weight of a federal sentence means what it sounds like it means is something only Heather knows. The people who loved Sheila have had to decide for themselves what to do with it. Sheila's sister Debbie said she cannot wrap her head around the way her sister died. She said she looks at a suitcase differently now, that she still travels, but that it is always there. That is the part that doesn't get mentioned in the legal proceedings or the sentencing documents or the timeline of arrests and trials and appeals. The part that stays, not the details, are hard enough. The image of something ordinary, something you pull from the closet and wheel through an airport without a second thought, permanently changed. As of early 2026, Tommy Schaefer remains in Bali, serving his 18-year sentence. Based on that timeline and accounting for no reductions, he is due for release around 2033. He has also been indicted in the United States, meaning that release will likely not mark an ending so much as a transfer. Stella lives with a cousin of Heather's in Colorado. She was born in prison. She never had the chance to meet her grandmother. She lost access to both of her parents before she was old enough to understand any of it. Her life, by every measure, began inside a consequence she had no part in creating. There is something that comes up when you look at a case like this one, something that sits just beneath the surface of every headline and courtroom update. The question of how a person arrives at something like this. Not the mechanics of it, not the suitcase, or the bowl or the taxi, but the distance traveled internally before any of it was possible. Heather Mack lost her father at 10 years old in a hotel room in a foreign country. She blamed her mother for the rest of her life, and somewhere along the way, that blame became something she chose to feed rather than grieve. Someone came along who fed it with her, and the two of them turned it into a plan. There are people who will look at that and see a trajectory that, with different interventions at different moments, might have bent another way. And there are people who will look at it and say that some choices go so far beyond explanation that the question of how becomes beside the point. Sheila kept trying. Every trip, every car, every opportunity, every time she declined to press charges,